Hello everyone. Welcome to this video cast. I wish you many blessings on this so-called new year. I've remember many years ago an old Presbyterian minister saying, I don't know why everybody says Happy New Year. The devil does not use a calendar. And I hope that is not true this year. Being in the situation I am, I'm quite eager for the province to get off its tuchus and begin having the vaccinations as I'm in an at-risk category and would like to do something about that. I hope you're well. I hope that you had some joy and some cause for gratitude over the last few weeks. I'm going to ask you to take another look at your syllabus as you get ready and burn a few things into your awareness. We're coming up to the last half of this program, and we're on the third module, which is liturgical reflection. That is, integrated theological reflection as it applies to liturgy. Now, I'm going to have a couple of hopefully brief videos to tease on that, and this is the first of three. So let's take a look at that and look through that. I would also like to remind you that as we are starting this module and the second half of our time together, that we have a couple things to do. First of all, if you have any discussion topics that are really interesting you, whether or not you want to do that as a presentation, which is one of your options instead of a final paper, then I suggest that you contact me as soon as possible and we'll put together a meeting and we'll talk about it. So if you have any other discussion topics that aren't in the syllabus, I really need to know right away. Okay. We also need to be looking at scheduling our third one-on-one Zoom meetings. I'm not sure that having a class meeting is going to work for us. It didn't seem practical before, but I would like to try in a couple of weeks to have at least one of those. Okay, first of all, I'd like to start by apologizing very briefly. When I was asked to come back and do this course again this year, I was aware that I was going to at some point or another be needing total knee replacement surgery. And if you have had it, or if you know somebody who has had it, it's often a 2-year waiting period. And because of cancellations and COVID and the flux and the fact that I live in a region that is very lightly affected by COVID-19, I got a call in the beginning of November, and like literally I signed the papers, had my last pre-op interview, and the next week got a call. So I apologize, it's taken me a little bit astray. At the same time, what I'm getting at is that at some point I'm going to get a call for the second knee. I'm going to try to put it off to the second week in April. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't count on being able to get an extension, because I've got a good week after the surgery where I'm not going to be able to mark papers. So we'll have to be very careful together to make sure that my inconvenience doesn't create a problem for you. Keep in mind that one of your options, if things are getting too crazy and too difficult, one of your options is to negotiate a P outcome. Now that means a pass. That means that you get the credit, but it doesn't accrue to your grade point average. I did this in my first year of MDiv. I'd never passed a language course in my life, ever, not once, and was taking Hebrew. And I went to my professor, who retired at the same time, literally the same week as me, and asked him to put me down for a pass-fail. And he was absolutely furious, but he did it. Anyway, a couple months later, he's walking down the hall one way and I'm going the other, and he said, Mr. Zub, and I said, Professor Morrow, and he said, you would have gotten an A. Anyway, that's life. You can negotiate a P, which means that you'd also not be required to do quite as much work, if you're getting my drift. I'm not trying to get out of the work. I'm telling you that if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's a conversation we can have. Okay, so Module 3, Theological Reflection in Liturgy. And that liturgy is actually an act of a particular kind of theological reflection. Years ago, I had an intern who was a very reluctant intern. She didn't want to be assigned to me. To be truthful, I wasn't that crazy about having to take her on, but there we were, and she was going through my, at that time, very extensive library in my office, where I had a church not too far from Alliston. And she looked over and she said, "There's nothing here about pastoral care." It was all church history, systematic theology, historical theology, that kind of thing. And I said, "It's all pastoral." She didn't buy it, but that's the case with liturgy too. It's all pastoral. And to have a pastoral theology is an essence of what we do. To have a Christian pastoral theology is even more important. Shortly before my surgery, and I was almost the poster boy for failing. I got to tell you this. I was just this close to not recovering from my surgery. I mean, I would have lived, but it would have been pretty miserable. And just before my surgery, my colleagues here were asking about how I was adjusting to the idea, and I said, "Well, to be frank, I'm really worried about it." And one of the older ones, a woman, a DLM, said, "You need a better attitude. You have a better attitude. You have to be more positive." Who said I have to be more positive? I'm worried. I'm concerned. But they wouldn't acknowledge the genuine fear of going through that. I've known dozens of people have this surgery, but it's different when you're facing yourself, just as it's different when you're facing your own mortality, the mortality of your mother. It's a different experience than when you're dealing with somebody who is a congregant, a parishioner, no matter how much you love them. So, in essence, and I've encountered this quite a bit, you have these Easter Sunday ministers who want to always be telling you that everything will always work out. And a friend of mine who died recently used to say to me all the time, "David, only the man upstairs," sorry about that, this is him talking, he was 93, "only the man upstairs knows what's actually going to happen. And I wake up every morning and thank God that I've got another day." And I said, "Glenn, you know someday you won't have the whole day." He was good with that. He laughed. We have to be honest about what we're facing, because to engage in theology, to engage in Christian theology, is to face and to accept Christ's own suffering, a Good Friday approach, if you will, or a Maundy Thursday approach, in which the anticipation of the suffering is perhaps more dreadful than the suffering itself, although I can't say that for sure. But to face and to accept and to embrace Christ's suffering in where it is found, in the suffering of others, and even in our own suffering. And not to try to jolly it away or to mitigate it or to say it's all about attitude. It's not all about attitude. It is about being there for one another and being able to talk about these things. So, to that end, worship, the entirety of worship, is the first and last pastoral act of every week. And when you have a period of time where you're not doing liturgy, Advent is often one of those times, or of course when you're on your vacation or whatever, you'll find that it slips quite a bit. But to engage in the liturgy as the liturgy celebrate the work of the people, celebrating Christ's victory over the imposition of suffering, for instance, is the way I'd put it, is a pastoral act. It is thematic of what we're up against. It's part of the paradigm of where we live within the heart of God, and it's grounded in Scripture. It's not a matter of opinion. I forgot to mention earlier, every once in a while I have to move because otherwise I seize up. Excuse me just a second. And I also had to close that door. So what does that look like? Well, I'm sure I mentioned it before, but back in the last half of the 20th century, there was still a tendency to create a dichotomy between the theological work of Paul Tillich, a German-born, German-trained theologian who finished his life and career in the United States, and Karl Barth, Swiss Reformed pastor who worked in Germany up until World War II and returned to Germany afterwards to do his teaching career. Both giants of the 20th century. Karl Barth probably much more celebrated at this point. But there was a tendency to create a dichotomy in which, in '95 when I went to Japan, they would always ask, are you Tillich or are you Barth? Meaning that, do you embrace Tillich's notion of a correlational theology, whereby you encounter an event, the suffering of an individual, social event, political event, and then search the Scriptures for a way of addressing it? Or are you a subscriber of Karl Barth's deductive method in which you encounter the Scripture and then from the Scripture look at the world? And if I had to make a choice, I would say that I was the latter. My point being that you're probably doing something like one or the other when you're writing your liturgy. And it's not so much important that you are right or wrong. It's important that we be mindful of what we're doing. And so very often, when writing the total service, and the sermon would usually be the last thing I'd write, that I would actually have somebody in mind, but I would still have the Scripture in front of me, and I would be doing exegetical work to start before I went anywhere else. I'm going to talk about exegesis more thoroughly in 2 weeks than I am now. But to make sure that we are grounding what we're doing in the scriptural witness. Otherwise, I would have to say that we risk being something other than Christian pastors, Christian theologians. I was a social worker before, so I have a little bit of idea of what that means. And in fact, when I went to Queens in 1990, I was warned against the sins of being a pious social worker. It was an interesting time. So what I want you to do this week is, first of all, think about these emergent issues around what we are doing when we do liturgy. I want you to think carefully about what you are seeing and hearing when you sit by yourself with the Scriptures in front of you, and how you're managing that. Now, in reading your papers, and I enjoyed them all, some emergent issues did occur to me. First of all, in general, I would have to say that the themes, the thematic base of your liturgy, did not emerge early enough in the worship service. Not necessarily the case. I was not cognizant, nor did I worry too much about the amount of time being taken on any particular part of it. So I didn't worry about that. But I also wondered what you do with the epistle. People like stories. People don't like prose per se. So you have, for instance, the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Romans, which thematically are extremely similar, but we'd rather read the Gospel of Luke. No doubt about it. So what do we do with this epistle? And I'm going to post something that I decided to do a long time ago in writing a prayer of the apostles. and having the epistle rewritten as a prayer. So watch for that. And then ask yourself too, how do I state my theme early in the service, so that we know where we're going. It really should come out in the call to worship and then be enlarged. Now, what I've done in the past is a conflation of several aspects of the first third of the service. So it's been 25 years since I did what would be called a standard service, and it's gotten me into some trouble when I visited in other places. But I took the call to worship and the prayer of reproach and the confession, and I conflated them according to the epistle reading. So that's what I'm going to give you in an offering, if I can find it, and I'm sure I can. So therefore, every week included a prayer based in the epistles. It's essentially the task of writing a psalm. Psalm writing, and there was a woman named Endicott of the famous Endicott family. And if you recall your church history, back in the 60s, there was an Endicott minister who advocated strongly for including China in the United Nations, and he was basically pilloried. That was her father. And she became a professor and used to do workshops on psalm writing. Well, this is basically what we're talking about here, is taking the epistle and writing a psalm. So that's what I want you to do in the next couple of weeks as part of your discussion on Bright Space, is to paraphrase your coming up epistle reading as a psalm. And you might find it worthwhile to use that as your prayer of reproach or part of your pastoral prayer at the end of the service. Okay, so we have those few housekeeping things. Let me know if there's any burning issues you want to touch upon. If you're going to do like a workshop, if you're going to present a topic rather than write a paper, let me know. Tell me what your topic is, and we'll work on that together. We have to talk about getting together one-on-one Zoom meetings as well. And then for your assignment for Bright Space, I'd like you to do the exercise with the epistle of an upcoming Sunday and rewrite it as a liturgical prayer. Next, coming up in 2 weeks, actually the January 25th, is going to be exegesis and the preparation of liturgical prayers. That's exactly where we're going to go from there. But we're going to talk about exegesis more in terms of the style that you've developed. So think about what you do to carefully read the scriptures, how you do it. I don't see anything else in the upcoming syllabus to touch on right now, so I'll let you go. And it's so nice to be back with you in this new year. I remember in the original Anne of Green Gables books, there's one line in which Anne celebrates the morning with her foster mother and says, I just love a new day. There's no mistakes in it yet. Well, it's 2021. God bless you all, and we'll talk to you soon.